hope that you are well, and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 3 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English language arts, grade 3, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. All right, so adjectives, right? So we see that our chapter is adjectives. Our subject is English language arts. All right, so we said our chapter is adjectives. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 3. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of adjectives is, does the adjective tell you what kind or how many? And identify the adjective that describes the noun. All right. So when it comes to adjectives, right? Adjectives, it tells us more about the noun, or we can even say it describes the noun, or it modifies the noun, right? But in this case, we can say the adjective is a word that tells you about the noun. Remember, nouns, it names people, places, animals, things, right? That's a noun. So an adjective, it tells us more about that noun. tells us more about the different nouns. It describes these nouns, right? And when we describe the nouns, then it can either tell us what kind of noun it is or how many of the nouns there are. All right. So remember, we said that an adjective, it either tells us more about the noun or describes the noun, right? All right. So we said when it comes to adjective, right? Some adjectives they tell us what kind, other adjectives they tell us how many, right? So usually what kind is like when you have words like a pretty car, a white dress, red dress, black dress, right? All right. So we said that when it comes to adjectives, right, it tells us about the noun. And if we have adjectives like what kind, I made a few examples now when I said about the red dress, yellow dress, white dress, right? The color of something, right? Either the color of the dress or the shape of the dress, right? This can basically then tell us, for example, what kind, right? So what kind of dress is it? It's either a red dress, it's a white dress, it's a Barbie dress, right? All right. And remember we said that some adjectives, they answer the questions on what kind, right? For example, the small baby smiled. What do you think might be the adjective within that sentence? The second one is she carried heavy books. So if we were to select and identify the adjectives within that sentence, right? Then we can say that the small baby smiled, right? We could have just said that the baby smiled, but now we are specifically saying the small baby smiled, which means that our word small is an adjective, right? Because we could have said that the crying baby, the cute baby, something baby. We could have described or said something about the baby, right? But we specifically saying the small baby. Yeah, so small is correct because a small baby smiled. She carried heavy books. She carried heavy books. All right. If we look at the next one says she carried heavy books. So she carried heavy books. Which one tells us about the noun? She carried heavy books. We could have just said that she carried books, but now we're specifically saying it is heavy books. So heavy is also a it is another adjective, right? That tells us what kind. And then an adjective it also tells you about a noun, right? And some adjectives they answer. Oh, we already have this one. Some of the adjectives they tell us how many, right? And the adjective that tells us how many, it can be words like many, much, a lot, five, three, 30, right? But it basically tells you how much, right? So we say that an adjective, it can either ask what kind or how many. How many, we can even say, it's just like saying, I have 5 dolls. All right. So once again, we say that an adjective it tells us more about the noun. It describes the noun. It modifies the noun, right? And some of the adjectives they answer what kind. All right. Remember we said small and heavy. Those were the two adjectives that we identified within our sentence. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca and we're going to a tutorial lesson, right? So we're going to aplusstudents.ca and then we're going on to our two lessons, starting by does the adjective tell you what kind or how many? All right, so we're going to the first one that says, does the adjective tell you what kind or does it tell you how many? How much or how many? Okay, so for example, if an adjective asks you what kind, right? Let's say you have on a brown pants, right? So now it says I don't know what your real name. B Funks is wearing his brown trousers, right? Trousers or pants. Let's say just say pants, right? So now if we look at that, right, I can remove the word brown, right? And then I can just say B Funk is wearing his pants. But now we're asking what kind of pants is he wearing? And we can say he's wearing a brown pants. And when it comes to what kind can be described as in color, can be described as in height. It can be described in different ways, right? But now if you ask what kind, then we, for example, making mention of it is a brown pants or it is a shorts pants or something, or a long sleeve pants or short sleeve pants, right? So something that is telling us about the pants. That is basically the question when they ask you, what kind? Does that answer your question? So if we, for example, say it tells us what kind, then we can say it is, like for example, Nanny says, I'm a girl, right? So if Nanny says, I am a girl, now this is just a sentence, right, on its own. But now if I, for example, say, I am a pretty girl, now you're asking yourself, what kind of girl are you? Now we say pretty tells us what kind of girl she is, right? Tall girl or tall boy, tall is the word that tells us what kind of person it is, right? All right. Does that once before I continue, does that answer everybody's question before we continue? All right, I'm going to continue, right? So that is basically what kind. If we say how many, right, it tells us how many or how much. Then we can maybe say 5 books, 10 books, a lot of books, right? So the word like the number 5, 10, a lot, those are words it tells us how many or how much, right? All right. So now we're going back to a plus students.ca. All right. Let us go to our oh, yo, where are we? Here. So we're saying, does the adjective tell us what kind, right? So yeah, it says an adjective is a word that tell you about a noun. Some of the adjectives they ask the question what kind. And I made an example of how you can identify if they say what kind, right? It can either be identified as in color, as in length, as in height, as in weight, right? And then at there we also have some adjective that tells us how many. How many, right? Oopsie. Adjective that tells us how many, right? And the adjectives that tells us how many, right? It says one baby smiled, right? So how many babies smiled? One baby smiled. She carried some books, right? So how many books did she carry? Doesn't necessarily say the amount, but some is our adjective, right? All right. So now we're gonna go to our test, right? Okay, before we go to the test, let us quickly do 2 activities. Yeah, it says, I have been there 4 times. I've been there 4 times. Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? If they say 4 times, does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many times? All right. So if we look at the sentence, right, that says, I have been there four times, right? And I've been there four times, it tells us how many times they have been there. Yes, well done. It tells us how many times that the person has been there, right? Usually, if there's a number, then you must know it tells us how many, right? If it describes something in color, in weight, in height, in, and then it is what kind, right? Let us go to our test. I just wanted us to do that one question so that we at least know what the difference is between how many and what kind. Okay, so now look at these adjectives in bold, right? So it's five. Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? Follow these five rules. Does it tell us what kind of rules or does it tell us how many rules? All right, so we can then say, if they say follow these five rules, then we can say it is how many. Because how many rules do we have to follow? Five rules, right? So well done. How many is correct? One sock is missing. One sock is missing. Does this tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? One sock is missing. So the word one, does it tell us what kind or how many? All right, so if we say one sock is missing, then we can say how many socks is missing? Only one sock is missing, right? Colton spent $15. Colton spent $15. Does that tell us, so 15, does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? All right, so it says Colton spent $15. The word 15, does it tell us what kind or how many? And if we look at the word 15, right? Remember 15 is a number, so which means that it tells us how many. Right? So well done. Option 2 or how many. The park has three slides. The park has three slides. Does it tell us what kind of park it is or does it tell us how many slides they have? All right. So we said how many slides? How many? How many slides? Three slides, right? So three slides it is. All right. It says sit in a comfortable chair. Comfortable. The word comfortable. Does it tell us what kind of chair or does it tell us how many chairs? Comfortable. Does it tell us what kind of chair or how many chairs? All right, so we can say if we say sit in a comfortable chair, right? Then the word comfortable does it tell us what kind or how many. So comfortable tells us what kind. So what kind of chair? It is a comfortable chair, right? Now we're going to identify the adjective that describes the nouns. And remember, we said that an adjective it either describes a noun, or it modifies the noun, or it tells us about the noun, right? So we're going to now identify that specific adjective that tells us more about the noun. All right, so here they say if you select the adjective, right, that tells you how many, then it says the six friends will walk to the store, right? Then we know six is that tells us how many, right? So that is basically just what you need to keep in mind. Adjectives that tells us how many or adjectives that tells us what kind, right? But now let's go to our password. I'm sorry, somebody mentioned password and now I'm saying password. Let's go to the test. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. What kind? Look at the beautiful butterfly. Is it at that tells us about the butterfly, or is it beautiful that describes the butterfly? Because that is our adjective, the word that describes our noun. All right, so we can then say beautiful is a word that tells us what kind, right? So well done. Beautiful is a word that tells us what kind. It says Mitchell has a red belt. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind of belt Mitchell wears. Is it a or is it red? That tells us what kind of belt Mitchell has. All right, so we can then say Mitchell has a red belt. Yes, and then the word red is the adjective that tells us what kind. So, what kind of belt? It's a red belt. Remember, The reason why we're saying is what kind also and identify the adjectives. Because if you even look at the word red belt, you can get a black belt, you can get a brown belt, right? You can get different types of belts, but we specifically made mention of a red belt. Emma sang a pretty song. So the word, we need to select the adjective. Is it sang or is it pretty? All right. And if we were to choose the word, the adjective that tells us what kind, we would then say that Emma sang a pretty song. So it's a pretty song. So the word pretty is our adjective. Yes, well done. Pretty is our adjective because it describes the song, right? What kind of song was it? It was a pretty song. It was a beautiful song. It was a lovely song, right? This was a wonderful play. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. So, what kind of play was this? Was this a wonderful play or just a play? All right, so we see that that was a wonderful play. So, wonderful tells us what kind. It's adjective that tells us what kind. All right, it says Dalton did a silly dance. Dalton did a silly dance. All right. So it says Dalton did a silly dance. What is the word that tells us what kind within that sentence? Is it silly or is it dance? So the words like what kind, right, that describes the nouns, right? It can be words like silly, right? In this case, we can say it is silly. So Dalton did a silly dance, right? Guys, we're going to end in 2 minutes time. Almost there, almost there. The woman completed three puzzles We need to select the adjective that tells us how many puzzles she completed. Is it three or is it woman? All right, so let us do the last one. It says the woman completed three puzzles. We need to select the adjective that tells us how many. How many puzzles did this woman complete? Is it three or is it woman? All right, so this is the woman completed three puzzles, and we said three tells us how many puzzles the woman completed. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? And we said adjectives, it is words that describes or tells us more about a noun, right? Adjectives, they can either tell us what kind or they can tell us how many, right? That is adjectives because it tells us more about the noun, it modifies the noun, right? And remember, we said when we identify something by saying what kind, then it can either be in different color, it can be weight, it can be height, right? And then how many is usually in a specific number. How many items or how many nouns they are of that can be one, it can be five, can be 100, for example. All right, so that is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much, grade. Please, I really hope that you do have a bit understanding of what adjectives are, and you should have a good evening further. Goodbye.